An Extra Knife at Dinner, a Gabrielle Ibrahim mystery. An audio series by Patricia Asedegbega. Episode 9. Sandra snapped at the waitress, a clear indication that she was in a bad mood. Gabrielle observed her friend. Though she had greeted her with joy, she was more subdued than usual. "As I have no intention of spending an agonizing hour in your company with your present mood, Sandra, spill," Gabrielle said. "And you'd best give that girl a very generous tip when we leave." Sandra vehemently rejected her suggestion. A tip? For doing her job badly? No, I don't reward a lack of professionalism. She was nervous. You gave very curt answers to her meal suggestions. "Why ask about the specials when you don't want to hear them?" Gabrielle asked. "Sandra, you know that when you're in a bad mood, you take it out on others. Her spilling the water on the table was an accident waiting to happen, and that's all on you. Now, what's the matter?" "Mark and I had a fight yesterday evening, and I told him that I never wanted to see him again. And I mean it. Never, ever do I want to set eyes on that man again." A furious facial expression accompanied Sandra's words. "Aha, that's why you're so upset. I'm guessing we're in the second phase of your anger now, the one where you know you said things you shouldn't have, and now your conscience is waking up and you're convincing yourself that you were right. But you're not 100% sure." Gabrielle chuckled as Sandra gaped at her, mouth hanging open for a moment, before bursting out laughing. "You know me too well. Well, you know that Rachel Eremo girl, the one he was dating when I came into the picture?" "You knew about that?" Gabrielle interrupted in surprise. "Of course," Sandra retorted. "I did a thorough background check on him before things started getting serious. With all the resources available today, women need to use them and check out what a guy's saying to sell himself before they inherit debts, lies, heartache, and a string of problems. Anyway, yesterday we were at the club, and Mark went over to say hello to a friend of his that came in, and that girl and a few of her entourage had the audacity to come over to our table to tell me that out of consideration to me and to save me from suffering, she felt it was her duty to let me know that after Mark was tired of me, he'd return to her. She said both families were aware of my existence and were waiting to set the wedding date. You know me, it's difficult to throw me off balance, so I told her that the fact that she'd waited for Mark to leave before coming to try her scare tactics on me, not taking into consideration that I wasn't the kind of woman that she could try that on, was indicative of it not being such a done deal. I then asked her to please wait for Mark to return so she could ask what kind of flower arrangements he wants at their wedding reception. Of course, after throwing a few insults my way, she turned around and left. So, because I'm a lady, I behaved myself until we left the club. But in the car park, I gave Mark an earful, and then I drove off. Look at all the missed calls and messages." Sandra held out her phone. Indeed, Mark was being very persistent. "But you did know about her, or at least women like her in his life," Gabrielle said. "One of the reasons you hesitated to date Mark was because of his reputation. Judge his behaviour on how he's treated you and how he is now. Then ask yourself if he's still the same person. And, in that analysis, you should factor in that you're not the same person either. For some time you've been the Sandra I met so many years ago. Do some self-searching too. Are you willing to walk away from all that? You've never been one to shy away from a bully. Do you want to start now? Because from where I'm standing, you have the most important factor, Mark. The reason she's so nervous is because she has no control over him or what he does, so she resorts to scheming and the use of scare tactics." Sandra was silent for a moment, and Gabrielle looked down at her plate of food, suddenly feeling hungry as she had not eaten anything at the office. They ate in silence for a moment, her friend still deep in thought. I don't doubt Mark's feelings for me, and I understand that his change couldn't have happened overnight, Sandra said eventually. The truth is that he's not the same flirty person he was at the beginning. He hasn't treated me in any way that's made me feel uncomfortable. On the contrary. At least now I understand why his mother's so cold to me. Look, Gabrielle, you know my family. We're proudly middle class, and I'm comfortable. My job pays really well. I can sustain my lifestyle, travel out of the country. I don't need anyone to take care of me. And I'm actually helping a number of relatives. But I'm nowhere near your league, your money, your connection, your influence. If there's one thing I like about you, it's that being probably the richest woman in Africa, you've never made me feel like I wasn't up to the standards of the people you normally mix with. Yet, it's evident why Mark's family wants Rachel. She's in his league. They're mutually beneficial to each other, and I'm not her. That was what annoyed me most, the fact that what they don't like about me, I can't remedy. And to be honest, I shouldn't even have to. Sandra shook her head in disapproval. Yes, I heard things about Rachel after the infamous party everyone seems to want to forget, Gabrielle said. I didn't even know about her existence before that day, and I'm guessing that her presence was carefully orchestrated. But that shouldn't bother you. Even without asking you, I know that if Mark was cheating, you'd walk, because you're a woman that knows she deserves better. What's bothering you is something only Mark and you can sort out. So maybe you ought to pick up that call, and if you like his answers to your questions, then move on with your life one way or another. Sandra eyed the screen of her phone, but made no attempt to pick it up. Gabrielle laughed. Her friend was stubborn, and she would probably let it ring all day. You defending him is a good sign. You're a good judge of character. And I know you would have told me about Rachel if you thought something fishy was going on Mark's side, Sandra said, after finishing the last of her okra soup. No matter how upset she was, her favourite soup would never go to waste. Now, having sorted this out, I think you and I need to look into this. Gabrielle put the photograph on the table and pointed out the waitress. Where did you get that? Sandra asked in amazement. I haven't seen a single image of the party, and I've looked for them. I have my ways. Gabrielle winked at her mysteriously. Sandra picked the picture up and studied it for a moment. Are you still interested in trying to find out who stole your bag? Gabrielle asked. Because this waitress seems to have been everywhere. There are a good number of photographs of her, and I'm not 100% certain, but I think she was the one who filled my glass. Can you remember her? Ah, you just reminded me of a very painful topic. My bag, Sandra exclaimed. If she's the one, she can't hide anywhere. We'll find her. This girl, I saw her near our table several times. Leave it with me. I'll find out about her from the catering company. We'll track her down, and if she has my bag... I might be reading too much into things. Waiters are normally assigned to a particular table. Maybe she was around ours so much for that very reason, Gabrielle mused. I honestly didn't pay attention to the staff as Mark was introducing me to different people, and I practically had the same glass of champagne in my hand the whole time, till we sat down, Sandra recalled. Then, when they served the first course, I remember that they went around our table serving white wine. But Gabrielle, it was a man that served us, it wasn't this lady. I remember that you signalled her when we were about to make the toast. So she wasn't our waitress. Maybe she was supposed to just look around in case she was needed. Do you have any other photographs? Gabrielle thought for a second before nodding. There was nothing incriminating in the photographs that would make Sandra suspect the other issue that was particularly important to her. She gave her friend her mobile and waited as Sandra looked through them. You're right, she does appear in a lot of photographs, and they're all outside the house. Should she have been there? Ha! No, we must find her so I can interrogate her properly. She must know where my bag is, Let's order dessert. I need extra energy. Gabrielle smiled. Sandra had a new project, and she was not one to leave things half done. The waitress would be found, sooner rather than later. She was sure about that. Gabrielle, on the other hand, had decided where she would be that night and the following nights. She needed to find answers. Gabrielle took a sip of her mojito as she looked around. She had not told Solomon her plan, and an hour after he dropped her at home, Gabrielle had called her trusty taxi driver and gone to the club. The one where Antonia had been given the contact of the person who was to take care of her little problem. But it was proving quite frustrating as, so far, 5 men had tried to buy her drinks. Gabrielle understood that a woman on her own could give the wrong impression, but she was in no mood to listen to senseless conversations and hear promises that she knew none of those men had any intention of fulfilling. She continued to scan the bar area. The bartender might know, but could she just go up to her and ask? "Really? This is what you do when Solomon drops you off?" Gabrielle had been lost in thought and almost jumped out of her skin when Chuck sat himself beside her, drink in hand. "Well, I had to do something, so I've decided to come here until I see someone suspicious," she replied. "This is where Antonia's plan stopped being a figment of her imagination, so this is where I must be." "Okay, I don't know you that well, but this is evidently not your scene. You aren't blending in. People are staring at you and probably recognizing you from the press. You look completely out of your element." Chucks chuckled. "And what would my scene be, according to you?" Gabrielle asked. "More of a quiet place where you can have a conversation, and definitely not at this time of the night. Am I right?" Chucks raised an eyebrow, and Gabrielle laughed. "Look, we need a plan," she said. "Maybe if we could have an argument near the bar and I could storm off, and then you could let slip that you'd be willing to pay a good amount to get rid of me." "On the scale of very bad plans, that's just the worst I've ever heard, and I've heard some really terrible ones," he replied. "You want to give them another opportunity in case they get it right this time. Not to mention the fact that everyone here would bring out their mobiles and put it on social media. Nope. No way. Not happening. But you've given me an idea. Solomon might have staff willing to do it, make up a story, get the contact, and the police can trace it before they shut their phone off. Especially because, until a payment's made, the person won't disappear." Chuck smiled and nodded. "See, all the time we wasted here, we should have done this from the beginning." Gabrielle thought that the plan had not been the worst, after all, if a variant of it was going to be put to use. "So, now that's been sorted, did you drive, or should I drop you off?" Chucks asked. "Oh, don't worry, I'll call the driver that brought me." "Ah, Chucks, so you can come to a club and actually laugh and enjoy yourself," a voice interrupted. "When we were together, I had to practically drag you everywhere, and then you'd sit silently brooding as if you were being tortured. I see you've gone up the ladder." "Good evening, Miss Ibrahim. I don't believe that we've been officially introduced. I'm Rachel Eremo." Gabrielle shook the outstretched hand of the woman who had sat uninvited at her corner table and took the opportunity to study her. Rachel was pretty, tall, and very expensively dressed. She wore a hairpiece that she was sure Sandra could tell the price of just by looking at it. Chucks was staring at the newcomer in what no one could describe as a friendly manner. "Rachel, is there something in particular you wanted?" he asked. We were just about to leave. "Is there anything wrong with coming over to say hello to an old friend? I wanted to congratulate you personally on the success of your clinic. I hear nothing but good reviews about it. I must warn you, Miss Ibrahim, Chucks here will always put his beloved clinic first." From one woman to another, run whilst you can. Rachel smiled and winked at her. Miss Eremo, I think Chucks's dedication to his work is admirable. A breath of fresh air, Gabrielle said as she observed her. He genuinely cares about his patients, and that's a quality most women would find attractive. Now, if you'll excuse us, we were on our way out. She and Chucks got up and left the woman at the table. As they walked away, Gabrielle thought that Rachel had a poisonous attitude, and she didn't want her around Sandra. Once outside, she glanced at Chucks, wondering if he was upset. To her surprise, he was laughing as he escorted her to his car. He smiled at her as they climbed inside. The evening was definitely not wasted, thank you. You're welcome. I meant it, she said. I should let you know, in all fairness, that I intend on coming back here. Something tells me that I need to. In the end, it worries me that those people are looking for more victims. I was just a price tag, and the only reason I haven't gone to the police is because I don't want to hurt Antonia. The things her friends said made me think about the chances she's had. We'll probably never be friends, but I know I won't feel good about getting her locked up. I have to ask, aren't you even a little bit angry? I mean, you haven't had it easy either, and you just seem to be looking out for your sister, your mother and your father, who I'm sorry, but I have to say is partly responsible for this situation. Most people would have handed Antonia straight to the police. Chuck stopped at a light and turned to look at her. Oh, I've gone through being upset, indignant, angry, but I really try for those feelings not to fester in me. Gabrielle said. I tried to see the person beyond their actions. Antonia really didn't have it better, and she has a lot of issues. Behind the anger is a world of hurt and insecurity. I know. We have 3 psychologists camouflaged in the shelter. A good number of people wouldn't speak to a therapist if they knew they were interacting with one. One's working as a cleaner, the other's in the kitchen, and they talk to the people there, try to assess the situation. 2 of them joined the team last week, and I got a report. When Antonia arrived, she was near breaking point. It was a very critical situation. Anything could have tipped her over the edge. Gabrielle knew that was the case. She hadn't needed to hear it from him. She breathed slowly, in and out, a part of her relieved that Antonia was being helped. She knew that with her sister, the best approach was when she didn't know it was happening. The car slowed down as they got to her house. There was a time when I hated my mother, Chuck said, breaking the silence. Gabrielle looked at him without saying anything, hoping that he would elaborate and she could get a glimpse at the real person behind those intense eyes. My mother was born in the US, along with her brother, who's a priest and lives in Chicago. The family returned to Nigeria and my mum stayed here, became a nurse and got married to my dad, who came from a very well-to-do family. Anyway, when she got pregnant with me, there were complications, and her brother told her to travel to the US, where he was. My father joined her just before my birth, and they did the same thing with Chinwe. But with my youngest sister, only my mum travelled. My dad stayed back. He'd left the family business and branched out to start his own thing. He had to put in a lot of hours, so Chinwe and I were sent to our grandparents, so he wasn't home to be with us most of the time. To cut a long story short, the man wasn't just working. He was also busy starting a whole other family. My mother returned, had her hands full with the new baby and us, and didn't find out till Uju was about 9 months, when a friend told her. I was about 12. There's quite an age gap between the 3 of us. Like I said, my mother had issues, but she never gave up on having the family she wanted and kept praying for a surprise. You have no idea the drama that ensued. The other woman had had 3 children over the years, and my father had, again behind my mother's back, gone ahead to pay her dowry. The woman's family was influential, and they made clear that in the eyes of society and tradition, their daughter was not going to be the other woman. Oh my, I can't imagine what that must have been like for your mother, discovering that she'd been living a lie, Gabrielle uttered, horrified. They were still seated in the car and remained in silence for a moment. The problem was that my mother didn't want to cooperate, Chooks finally said. She said that she was married in church and her faith did not encourage that kind of situation. She said those were not the vows she'd made, and my father, in a bid to pressure her to play happy family and let him openly have 2 wives, completely cut us off financially. In 6 months, we went from a comfortable lifestyle to moving back in with my maternal grandparents. My father even got us evicted from the house. We changed schools, and my mother went back to work for the first time since she got married. My grandparents pitched in what they could, but they were civil servants. They passed away in the space of 4 years, and then it was just us. I remember clearly the day that I told her I hated her. I'll never forget it for as long as I live. My sister became really ill and developed a high fever that just wouldn't go down, and my mother rushed her to the clinic she worked in. They gave us a discount because she worked there, but not enough for what my mother could afford. It was a serious infection that needed urgent treatment, and so she went from one person to another, trying to gather the money. She called my dad, and I didn't hear the conversation, but I'd guess that he'd asked if she'd changed her mind, because, ironically, my dad had kept pressuring her through the years. When she came home for a change of clothes, I heard her talk to a friend of hers. She was crying, and that was the precise moment when I told her that it was all her fault and that I hated her. I told her that if Uju died, I'd never forgive her, and I asked her where her principles had got her. I can still see her, the look in her eyes as she took in my words, remaining silent. Anyway, she was able to get the money from a few friends, and after that I barely spoke to her. I became a sullen teenager who was always getting into trouble. It was so annoying to me that we could be living in comfort, but we weren't because she couldn't accept bigamy. My mother spoke to my uncle as I'd become impossible for her to handle. He came over during his annual leave, and I was bundled over to the US. The one thing that kept me grounded was that I decided I was going to be a doctor. There was no way I wanted to live with the fear of anyone else I knew, having their health depending on if they had sufficient money or not. I was angry for a long while, and didn't make things easy for my uncle until I stopped being angry. One day, I realized that everything had been taken from my mother. The only things that my father couldn't strip her of were her faith and her values, and it infuriated him. I made my peace with her, and she keeps sending patients my way who can't afford to pay. They're the best kind. Chooks smiled at Gabrielle when he finished. Your mother was really brave, she told him. I'm very sure that over the years friends and family will have pressured her to change her mind. I'm honestly in awe. Gabrielle had sensed that the quiet woman had been through a whole lot, but hearing her story made her feel nothing but respect. Yes, I heard her friends change their tune over time. One even told her that she was stupid, that the other woman and her children were going around town in an air-conditioned, chauffeured car while our fridge was empty. But my grandparents gave her all their support, and she's refused to leave that house. And how's your relationship with your father? Gabrielle asked. Oh, on my side, non-existent, Chooks said pensively. I told him exactly what I thought of him when I got back, and it just went in through one ear and out the other. He goes around telling people that he's the father of Dr. Agechi. He sends me people who feel they should be attended to immediately because they have money, while I, of course, set them straight. Now I look at him and think that while he produced 2 families, my mother's responsible for our success. I don't feel any gratitude towards him. I'm still a work in progress, and my mother tells me to pray to forgive him, and most days I feel I have. Then he resurfaces, and I have to make a supreme effort to look him in the eye and not walk away. It's a recurrent point in the confessional for me. Father Jerome said last time that I'd made some progress in comparison to when he first met me. I guess he sees something I'm unable to. So, you see, we both come from highly dysfunctional families. And you've turned out really, really well, Gabrielle said. How can I help with the shelter? I've been thinking about what you and Edmund are doing, and helping people start again is something I want to be part of. If there are ladies that need jobs, training, food... Not just ladies, we have 3 men too. I'll put you in touch with Edmund, and he'll let you know what's needed. He takes care of that part. Thank you. I have to go. I have surgery first thing tomorrow morning. Do speak to Solomon about the club. I really don't want to spend much more time there. Gabrielle watched him drive away. One never knew what was hiding behind a smile. Her thoughts returned to her own family, which was definitely as complicated as his, if not more. Two days later, Gabrielle was designing some sandals in her office when Solomon knocked and came in. She left her work table and gestured for him to take a seat on the other side of her desk. I just came in to let you know that we've looked into the new employees and they all came out in the clear, he reported. The 2 that spend the most time with you, Donatus and Uki, aren't connected to anyone that attended the party. Donatus has 3 children in school and his wife works in a hair salon. They have the usual get into the end of the month issues, but that's about it. Uki graduated with a first-class degree, something I'm guessing you already knew. She had another job before here, which she left because the business closed down. My team contacted her former dorm mates and work colleagues, pretending to be from a firm looking for references, and they described her as studious, dedicated, and very goal-oriented. An uncle of hers is in jail for embezzling client funds, but she wasn't even remotely involved with the scandal. Also, what you had in your fridge is fine. I'd still advise you to bring in your food and drink each day until we clear this up. I have people looking into finding Naomi and investigating the guest list and the waitress. Thank you so much. It's a relief to know that I can at least trust my staff, Gabrielle said. So, I told Dr. Agechi that I'd speak to you. Yesterday, I went to the club where my sister got the contact of the hired killer. I feel that it holds the key to a number of things, as those people will have to continue earning a living and looking for desperate customers. He said it would be better if you handled it. We thought of maybe getting someone to go there, scout the place, and let slip they needed a little job done. Maybe I've seen too many movies, but it feels like the hours I'm comfortable going there are when nothing of interest happens. Leave it to us. I have a niece that studied theatre arts, and she's come in very handy on a number of occasions, Solomon said. Please punch in your account so I can transfer something for your niece and the extra hours. I realise that more time is being put in than you were hired for. Gabrielle handed him her mobile, not giving him much of a chance to protest. She did not want Chooks to be billed for anything else, and Solomon's presence did make her feel safer. Thank you so much, Solomon. I think I prefer Donatus driving me from now on, so you can give your attention to this. I'll try to get more information about some of the attendees on my end. Solomon nodded and left, and Gabrielle picked up the phone. If there was anyone who knew about whatever happened in Lagos, it was Claire Jacobs. Somehow, she was always very well informed about whatever the topic was. Mrs. Jacobs, I hope you're doing well. Gabrielle, better now since you called. I just got back from a very tiresome board meeting, and I heard a bit of news about you. Your call saves me another one. The woman was quite direct whenever she wanted something. Well, how about we exchange information? I also need answers to some things I heard and always know what's going on. Claire laughed at the other end of the line at Gabrielle's words. Fine, you go first. Your question will give me the leverage to ask mine. I have 2, But for now, the first is concerning an altercation between Philomena Deji and Cynthia Akatha. I understand it threatened the latter's attendance at the party. What was it about? I didn't expect that question. You seem very interested in that day. Understandable. It's difficult to forget it. I wake up some nights from nightmares. Well, it had been building up for years. It was something small that made them explode at one of our monthly meetings. Both Philip and Cynthia are very competitive, and whenever it's their turn to host a meeting, they try to outdo each other. If one got a cake, when it was her turn, the other would present us with 2 cakes. If we go to a charity event, they wait till the end to see what each has donated, to try to beat it. So anyway, we were at Cynthia's house and we'd finished the meeting. She showed us to the dining room and the food was on the table. We were to serve ourselves and go back to the living room. Philo said in a very audible tone, "Oh, just 2 types of rice." That was what started it. A lot of ugly things were said, which provided the evening entertainment, but it did get rather tense. Yolanda, P. Sadakunli, and I tried to intervene, but it was impossible. So we ended up filling our plates and just listening in. It felt like watching a tennis match, our eyes darting from one to the other. Their grievances even went back to their uni days. Amazing what the human mind can store through the years. Philo told Cynthia to pay her workers and stop pretending that she was swimming in abundance, and Cynthia, in return, said that the only reason Philo had married her husband Stephen was because she'd had the good grace to step away out of pity, and that she was very sure from the state of things that the man was regretting his decision. They criticised each other's fashion sense, cooking, and even their children. Philo told her that she didn't belong in our group, and it got really ugly. Apparently Cynthia's son had briefly dated Helen, Philo's daughter, and it didn't work out. Cynthia blamed Philo's interference, and Philo said that Cynthia's son wasn't what she wanted for her daughter. Peace, at that point, looked at me and said that she was grateful that her children were younger and not friends with ours. I found that a bit offensive, as Alex and I have done nothing to her. But I understood what she meant. We were trying to be quiet so as not to be dragged into the fight, which ended with Philo storming out and saying that Cynthia should feel free not to attend the party. From what I understand, we all called both of them to try to get them to reconcile, but got nowhere. So I was shocked to see Cynthia at the party, acting like nothing had happened. But it was good to see her. Is there anything going on between Stephen Deji and Cynthia? Gabrielle asked. Or was it just a past relationship that she brought to light to get an edge in the argument? I saw Stephen at the party. He seemed quite mild-mannered. What's he like? She remembered the man from the event. He'd spent most of the time quietly moving around, smiling and greeting the guests. Well, I suspect not, Claire replied. Stephen's really not that kind of man. But I heard from someone who, in turn, heard from someone else that a week earlier, Cynthia and Stephen had lunch in a very well-known restaurant. I think she invited him, knowing it would get back to Philo. There's always been an underlying tension between the women, but Stephen's quite devoted to his wife. Had I not heard what really happened years ago, I would have had serious doubts. About 3 years ago, at a wedding we all attended, another woman that had gone to uni with both of them was there, and when she saw the ladies together, she told me that she was surprised they were on speaking terms. Back then, Cynthia hadn't taken well to Stephen leaving her for Philo. I was shocked, as when Philo hadn't been present on a number of occasions, Cynthia had told us that Philo ought to be grateful to her for her marriage, as she'd been such a good friend to let Stephen go. But this lady shook her head when I gave her the version that we'd been fed. She said that Cynthia had been dating Stephen for about 4 years. He was out of school and a bit older than them. In her final year, she got caught in an exam malpractice scandal. almost getting expelled, and Stephen broke up with her. A short while later, he started dating Philo, and they got married within a year. Stephen's a business whiz. He owns an investment company. We've all gone to him for advice, and from what I know of him, he hates any form of scandal or bending the law. So I wasn't at all surprised by what I found out. I did keep the info to myself, though. If Cynthia had her own version she wanted to go with, and Philo never contradicted her, who was I to set the record straight? Claire laughed. I understand that your group's made up of 5 women. How did it start? Is there a criterion to join? Gabrielle asked, mulling over their very complicated relationships. Years ago, when my husband was still alive, we used to meet up as couples most Saturday evenings in our club, Claire explained. The men would drink and talk business and politics, and we women naturally just drifted together and started doing things outside of those nights. They're just one of my group of friends, more social than anything else, but we supported each other over the years, through the good and the bad. Tell me about Peace. You mentioned her. I don't believe I was introduced to her. I think I know who the other ladies on your table were, Gabrielle said. She came late. We'd all been shown to our table, and it was when people were making their speeches that she practically ran in. Peace is always late to everything. We tell her a different time when she needs to be punctual. Peace and her husband own a number of filling stations in a few states. Her kids are at a boarding school in the UK, so she spends about half of the year away. Any more questions? Gabrielle thought that there was something she was missing, but she told the woman that she could ask her own questions. You were recently seen with a single, handsome and well-known doctor in a nightclub. Apparently, it's not the first time you've been out with this gentleman. Is he the reason you and Alex are not making me happy? Claire asked. Gabrielle remained silent for a moment. That she had not expected. No, he isn't the reason, she replied eventually. Could he become the reason? Was the next question the older woman asked. I can't answer that, Gabrielle said. She didn't know who was more shocked by her response, Claire or herself. To stay up to date with Patricia Asedegbega's work, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications.